Welcome, I'm Kajal Dhaneshwari.
And I'm Emma Perreault. Last episode, we looked backwards to see what's changed in the last couple of years. Now, we're looking ahead to see what we can do differently.
In this edition of the 25th Hour, we take a look at breaking down barriers.
This is Giancarlo Fiorella. He's one of Bellingcat's investigators, which is pioneering open source investigations.
A big part of our mission is to spread this as far and wide as possible, right?
Kind of an art to prompting, right? Yeah, for sure. And there's many different sort of styles and techniques, so I guess like many different arts.
I feel like this one, like the one with like my skin, yeah, that was almost like therapeutic for myself. Scary to post it online, but I needed to be honest with myself, and I guess I just like doing that in front of the public.
For this episode, we asked our reporters to look into what they care about and ask themselves what's changing.
And most of all, who or what is breaking down barriers in the things that they care about.
And not surprisingly for a journalism school, our first story is about journalism itself. Journalism is always evolving and is always being challenged to expand and improve.
That's what's happening right now with open source investigations, which are being pioneered by a group of passionate researchers. Benjamin Stephen explores what these investigations are and how they're helping journalists get to the heart of events all around the world.
As a journalist, my laptop is important. I file stories and conduct interviews all in one place. There's another way to use this nifty tool, and that's for open source investigations. Here's what you need to know. It's important to understand this term, digital open source information. That means anything you can find online with a computer and the internet. Think of videos and pictures that you see on Twitter or TikTok, or even all the info you can get from Google Earth. All of that is digital open source information. At first, those sources don't seem all that useful, but used in the right way and with the right training, open source investigators say they're critical. And leading the charge is an organization called Bellingcat.
There is so much information online, much more than you might think is there. And if you know how to find it, if you know how to navigate it, if you know how to verify it, you can really achieve really great things.
This is Giancarlo Fiorella. He's one of Bellingcat's investigators, which is pioneering open source investigations.
A big part of our mission is to spread this as far and wide as possible, right? So that everyone is able to do this. And that includes not journalists just from big organizations, but also from smaller groups as well.
Bellingcat started in 2014 by British journalist Elliot Higgins. Over the last 8 years, they've investigated major world events. That includes the downing of Malaysia Airlines Flight 17. Bellingcat traced the missile system all the way back to a Russian military base. In 2018, Bellingcat connected 2 Russian suspects to the poisoning of former Russian double agent Sergei Skripal. 1 year later, they identified a 3rd suspect. Today, Bellingcat is verifying information coming out of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. They're posting the info on publicly accessible maps. And all of their investigations were done with open source information. The idea of open source investigations has really caught on in the journalism world. In the last 5 years, some of the major news outlets have launched their own investigative teams. In 2017, the New York Times launched its visual investigations team, and so far they've shared in 4 Pulitzer Prizes and many more awards for their work. The Washington Post has jumped on open source as well. They launched their own visual forensics team in 2020 and decided to double the group earlier this year. That interest from journalists on open source information isn't surprising to some experts. I talked to Micah Clark, an open source intelligence expert who has taught people about open source information, including journalists.
My goal in teaching open source intelligence to journalists and others is to make them as resourceful as possible, to make them as clever as possible about understanding what they need and figuring out different ways to get it, rather than specifically finding one tool or another that will do that for them. Journalists, I find, tend to be really good OSINT students because they're already comfortable with working with relatively limited resources and being really resourceful and asking the right questions. It's kind of the heart of journalism. And so I find that they take to open source intelligence quite well.
But in order to really understand how open source investigations work, I asked Giancarlo to walk me through one of his projects. And it begins with the death of a Palestinian-American journalist in Israel earlier this year.
I saw a tweet from Al Jazeera that said that a Palestinian-American journalist named Shireen Abu Akleh had been killed in Jenin. She had been covering this raid that was happening in Jenin that the IDF was conducting. So there was lots of cameras there, not just news cameras, but cameras for people who were just in the area recording on their cell phones. And so we knew pretty early in the morning, like right after the tweet was sent out, that this was something that we could try to see if we could clarify the situation to determine who killed Shireen Abu Akleh.
Giancarlo and his team first found out where Abu Akleh had been killed by checking this photo from a Twitter video they found with a program called Mapillary. The program lets people upload photos and videos of streets around the world.
Based on this, we had a pretty good sense then of what this street in Jenin looks like. We'd never been there. I've never been to Jenin. Nobody who worked on this investigation with us had ever been to Jenin. But now you're starting to get a feel for the place.
Bellingcat also confirmed Abu Akleh was killed in the early morning. They looked at the shadows and Twitter videos they found from the killing, and they used a free program that tracks where the sun is on any given day. And with all that, they knew where and when this death had taken place. After checking footage uploaded by the Israeli Defense Force and other bystanders the same morning during the raid, Bellingcat made a key discovery. A military convoy was near Abu Akleh when she died, and a soldier could have killed her.
Once we figured out, okay, those vehicles are parked right up here, we started to get the sense that they probably had a really clear line of sight to Shireen Abu Akleh. So if you were a soldier in this truck or near this truck, you definitely could have seen her standing here as she was covering the raid.
Bellingcat checked and verified more videos and data. A sound expert was used to calculate the distance of the gunshots that killed Abu Akleh. And eventually, Bellingcat made this map. The green is the IDF convoy, the purple and orange are armed groups. The red circle is Abu Akleh. Their expert estimated the gunfire came from roughly 180 meters away, right where Bellingcat had the position of the IDF convoy.
We were the first publication to make that determination, to make that conclusion, again, that it was likely an IDF soldier. The Washington Post, the New York Times, CNN, and a couple of other organizations that I'm forgetting right now, they all conducted their own investigations into this incident, and they all reached the same conclusion, that it was an IDF soldier who killed her. And it was really encouraging, I suppose, for again, the strength of the methodology to see other organizations apply the same kind of research methods as we did to reach the same conclusion.
But not all open source investigators are journalists, so what does that mean for professionals like me? I asked Micah and Giancarlo the same question, and they said the two groups can work together.
I don't really consider myself a journalist. So, if you give me a list of phone numbers to like cold call, or if you tell me to go knock on a door, I don't know how to do that. I'd be really nervous. I'd probably botch it, right? So whenever we have to sort of do those sorts of things, it makes sense for us to say, hey, CNN, let's try it. Can we collaborate, right? We'll do what we're good at. You'll do what you're good at. Together, we'll achieve more.
The more that open source investigators can embrace the best traditions of journalism, I think the better we'll all be, because journalism comes with ethics, journalism comes with editorial guidelines, journalism comes with judgment and a decision process that could actually help to professionalize the open source investigative world as well.
What's going on at Bellingcat and the New York Times and the Washington Post is an evolution in journalism. We don't know how open source will be used in the future, but we do know that it's changing the stories we tell right now with more information than ever before.
There's another world being transformed by technology, the art world. Artificial intelligence that can make art has been around for a few years, but in the past few months, it's gotten really good.
Sometimes it's so good, it's almost like it was made by a human. In our next story, Rukhsar Ali explores how AI art is redefining the boundaries of creativity.
Think of any image you want to create, like a dragon flying over Parliament Hill in Ottawa at sunset. And there it is. To be clear, I didn't create this. No human actually did. This artwork was generated with AI. AI, or artificial intelligence, is a catch-all term for systems that mimic human intelligence. They perform tasks like any other machine, but what makes them different is that they're actually designed to make decisions. AI algorithms learn from the process to better the task the next time around. This technology has already been used in a number of ways, but now it's causing quite the stir in the art world. You may have already seen it before without realizing, like this Cosmo magazine cover from June, or this filter on TikTok. AI art generators like Stable Diffusion, DALL-E 2, and Midjourney take from large collections of existing images, and then they pull from these databases to generate entirely new creations. All it needs from you is a prompt. So if I give you a prompt like ocean on Mars, could you show me how we would do that?
Yeah, let's do it. We can put in our prompt, and so you wanted ocean on Mars. And we can start really basic just with that, and you will get something. So we can hit enter and see what it does. We could also create variants from any of these. So again, if you're like, this one's close, or I want like more in that general direction. The more common thing I would say is you realize that like, that's kind of a cool interpretation, but what I really meant was, you know, something else. Like I actually wanted an astronaut in there.
Yeah.
Or I wanted like a specific style, like I wanted it to look more like a painting or more like watercolor.
Okay, cool. So if I like those ideas, what if we wanted an astronaut and we wanted it in like a surrealist style?
Cool, let's try it.
So there's kind of an art to prompting, right?
Yeah, for sure. And there's many different sort of styles and techniques. So I guess like many different arts, there's no like one true way.
So this looks great. Like that's a super
cool, right?
interesting concept.
Yeah. Like if you searched an astronaut over the ocean on Mars in a surrealist style on Google, you probably wouldn't get this kind of image.
You know, I highly doubt that.
Like if you want to control the image, like if you have a very specific idea that you absolutely want the computer to give you that exact thing, it's actually more difficult than if you approach it as sort of this like collaborator with its own kind of idea of the world. But there are like actual practical physical limitations that some people have that would prevent them from creating. I think a lot of the accusations against AI artists are that it's like lazy or, you know, basically like, oh, they're not doing anything, the computer is doing it. But even if that is the case, and it absolutely isn't as far as I'm concerned, but even if it is the case, if they're able to express their creativity like with the push of a button, like, I don't know, for me that just seems great. Like why would we not want to enable that?
So AI art, AI generated art, are you freaking out about it?
There are some ethical issues, and people are starting to get concerned about things that they weren't thinking about months ago.
If you look at the perspective of the people creating these images, they really think they are like actual artists.
You automated piece of shit, I'm gonna have my one stable job stolen by your binary ass. Please don't.
From YouTube to social media to late night TV, there's real concern about what AI art means for artists. And despite AI's creative potential, there are critical questions that still need answering. Have you thought about the question of who really owns art that's been made with AI?
Yeah, it's difficult. I think there are two kind of questions that arise from that. It's whether, so the AI art model has learned from existing pieces of work that are openly available online, and then it's generating its own images that are like somewhat unlike what's been seen before, but there can still be some similarities. So then there's the question of ownership. Like, it's not directly copying, it's kind of being inspired by people, but is there an ownership and copyright question there? And then I guess the other side of it is, okay, someone has used this thing to generate the picture, but they haven't, apart from maybe giving it some prompts, they haven't done that much to make the art themselves. So do they own it, or is there another case of like the AI owns it itself because the AI has generated the photo?
What impact do you think AI-generated art might have on traditional artists going forward?
With it kind of working as a tool and allowing more people to get on, especially for digital art, I think like physical art is a completely separate topic of conversation, but for digital art, I think it allows many more people to get on and and be able to produce those kind of pictures. And if people who produce digital art aren't using these AI tools, I somewhat feel they're going to be left behind because they're not going to be able to cope with the pace that other people are generating images with, or the kind of the maybe not level of detail, but just like the rapid iteration that you can get by using these AI art tools, that if you're not using that, you're going to be a definite disadvantage to people who are.
There are definite concerns when it comes to artists potentially losing their jobs, and the issue of ownership when it comes to AI art databases. But art generators are still in their early days, and while we work through these critical issues, this new technology still shows a lot of potential for making art accessible. Art is dynamic, and the way we make art is always evolving, from early cave paintings to the Renaissance era to digital art. And the AI and art communities are adapting to this changing technology. For example, one art company, DeviantArt, is giving their artists the choice to opt into AI art databases on their platform. An AI company, Wombo, is looking at expanding its generators beyond images.
And so, today it's kind of like text to image, but in the future, we think it'll be across modality. And what we want to do is remove a lot of the technical barriers associated with kind of bringing your imagination and the stories inside of your head to life.
One thing's clear, this technology isn't going anywhere, which means maybe it's time to redraw the boundaries of creativity altogether. So whether you're picking up a paintbrush or you're heading to the computer, there's more than one way to create, and maybe even a little room for collaboration.
Coming up next, taking art to the streets.
We painted a huge mural that was 27 feet long around the theme of inclusion, racial equality, representation. In the mural, we have different faces: indigenous faces, people of color, and white faces. And on the mural, only the indigenous faces and the black faces got thrown some liquid on it.
Street art can be a way to liven up otherwise dull spaces, but it can also be used as a way to express social, political, and religious ideas.
Mei Lee explores how murals are a form of creative activism, bringing communities closer together and fostering important conversations.
I have always been fascinated by murals. They play a crucial role in communicating to society. I have always wanted to learn more about how the public interacts with art, especially those in public spaces. We visited Jimmy Baptiste's mural at the Byward Market.
My name is Jimmy Baptiste. I'm a graffiti artist, illustrator, art facilitator, father. Since I'm a black person, I always try to put black and people of color in my mural because I understand and I know the importance of representation in the world.
On the night of August 21st, 2022, the mural Stronger Together, painted by Kelkadan Asafa, Alan Andre, and Jimmy Baptiste, commissioned by Algonquin College, was defaced.
We painted a huge mural that was 27 feet long around the theme of inclusion, racial equality, representation, and so on. And in the mural, we have different faces, indigenous faces, people of color, and white faces. And on the mural, only the indigenous faces and the black faces got thrown some liquid on it. And that one of the reasons why I thought that was interesting is because it did spark the conversation of acceptability in the community that's mostly white, of having a mural that is mostly people of color, because Pembroke is a big community, but most of the mural are just white. All the mural are just white, just to be clear.
Asafa believes the same.
I think murals can be a form of activism, but not necessarily. You know, there's a lot of just like aesthetic artwork out there that's just meant to beautify the neighborhood, but there's also things out there with a message, so it all depends on the intention behind the work. I would hope that people can kind of just see the diversity and the beauty that's in this community, you know. There's a lot of different public artwork in Ottawa. A lot of it was historical in nature, and I think demographics of the city have shifted a lot in the past few decades, and I'd like to be part of representing that in public artwork.
Murals were used as creative outlets for activism throughout the 20th century. Mexican muralism empowered nationalism and pride within the country under the rule of post-Mexican Revolution government. The example was seen across the world in New York City. Diego Rivero created a commissioned fresco at the Rockefeller Center in New York. It was criticized as being representative of anti-capitalist propaganda. The mural was destroyed shortly after. We spoke with Emily Putnam, the PhD candidate and instructor in art history at Carleton University. She said during the World War II period, Pablo Picasso painted Guernica as a protest mural to criticize the bombing of the Spanish town of Guernica by Nazi German and Fascist Italy. In the 21st century, mural continues to convey similar messages throughout creative activism.
Murals and creative activism are still used in very similar ways. Sometimes we think about these things enough that we begin exploring these ideas, and we begin learning about issues and crises and areas of inequality and injustice that we wouldn't be confronted with. In 2015, two artists, Kalkadan Asefa and Alan Andre, created a portrait to honor and remember Sandra Bland after her death in police custody in the United States. And so that was quite a prominent example, especially as we started to see the rise of support for the Black Lives Matter movement.
Putnam emphasized that sometimes art isn't for everyone, but that doesn't mean it's not for someone.
We are not going to be on the same page about everything, but it's possible that through art we can begin to find a common ground, because you're engaging people and you're bringing them in and sort of pushing that boundary through something that is very usually visually colorful, and that welcomes us in for the dialogue.
We continue the dialogue with the public.
I think it would be, something about the appreciation of nature and like its inherent beauty.
It just feels so nurturing and healthy, and it just makes me feel good.
Tells a really nice story. I think just you can tell through pieces of it. It has a story of Indigenous culture, telling a story of life and beauty, and it brings a lot of color and energy to the byward market.
Murals in general inspire dialogue, whether it's about political, social, or religious freedom. So my question for you is, what do you think is the message behind the mural?
Challenging viewers isn't just something that painters do. Film directors like to do it sometimes as well. There's a new film hitting theaters now that's pushing the limits of gore and violence on screen. Anne-Marie Imolo explores how far some directors are willing to go and how much fans can endure.
So I'm a big fan of horror movies. I love slasher films, the suspense, sitting on the edge of your seat. One of my favorite places to come see them is right here at the Mayfair. It's a local theater in Ottawa that shows all kinds of films, and right when you walk inside, it looks like you've stepped back in time. The layout is super retro, they have a ton of movie memorabilia all around the theater. And just recently, the Mayfair screened a film called The Terrifier 2. It's a clown slasher film that's caused quite the stir online for its excessive gore on screen. While the first Terrifier was not released to cinemas, the second installment in the franchise premiered in theaters on October 6th. Despite the film's tight budget, director Damien Leone was able to create a gut-wrenching film that's already developed a cult following. But not everyone is amused by the extreme gore and bloodshed featured in the film. So why would a theater show such a violent movie? And why are people watching it? Here at the Mayfair, no film is off limits, regardless of the gore. But the theater has received pushback from fans for showing films that push boundaries. In 1983, the Mayfair was forced to cancel a showing of David Cronenberg's body horror classic Videodrome, after Ottawa police threatened the theater with obscenity charges for screening the film. So I sat down with Josh Stafford, co-owner of the Mayfair, to find out why they choose to show such films.
What I think is hilarious about us is that at any given day, we're playing the craziest horror movie ever at our 9 o'clock time slot, and then the matinee could be a family classic, and so we're really all over the place. But yeah, we've always screened kind of horror films and independent stuff and anything like that that is a bit off center, but then at the same time we're, as we speak, playing Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio, which is probably going to win an Oscar and is going to be on Netflix in a week. So we play the real mainstream stuff as well.
So there's clearly an appetite for these films. The first Terrifier had a $35,000 budget and wasn't released to theaters. But despite that, it became a cult classic and wildly successful on the internet through online streaming services. Now, the second Terrifier was released to theaters. So far, it's made over $10 million through its cinema release as well as streaming online. So I began to wonder, why are films that are so gruesome becoming so popular? I spoke to Professor Matthew Poulter from Carleton University. He's a film professor and a horror expert and fanatic. Have you seen or heard of the Terrifier movies?
I have seen the first film, and yeah, at the very least, I can't comment on the second, but the first one was definitely one where I remember going like, wow, I did not think you could make a movie this explicit these days. Like, I was a little impressed it became the hit that it did.
Why do you think people are so drawn to that or are willing to sit through people just getting kind of torn apart?
It's almost kind of hand in hand with why do people go on roller coasters? You don't do that because it's a safe experience or one that you need to have in your life, but it's that adrenaline rush that you kind of get.
Do you think we'll continue to see more movies like The Terrifier, where it's just almost directors pushing how far they can go with what they're showing?
I think we will, and I think that especially in horror as a genre, there's definitely already a market for that, and not just a market, but also a fascination with it, both academically and as audiences.
After my chat with Matthew, I decided to catch a screening of the movie myself and see what all the hype is about. And while at the Mayfair, I caught up with some other horror fanatics to hear their thoughts on the film.
Well, I like the first one, but also I heard it's supposed to be crazier or more intense or more. And I read a lot of hype about it, a lot just. So yeah, I'm pretty excited to see it. I like the creativity, the craziness. There's often a lot of taboo breaking or a lot of just. Bizarre stories, or there's certain things that you can do in horror movies. There's certain stories you can tell that you can't do in other movies.
No ambulances tonight. Looks like everyone's staying safe at the Mayfair. Everyone who came out was just looking for a good time and a good scare. That's what all horror movie fans love.
We are now going to turn from shared experiences with art to something more personal.
A story about something most people will have to deal with at some point in their lives, and it can deeply affect how we see ourselves.
I felt like acne was one more thing that made me stand out from the crowd. Besides from like my bushy eyebrows, my thick hair, my skin color, this is just one more thing on top of that that made me different from my peers.
Acne is a common experience for many people, especially when they're young. What's also common are the insecurities that come with it. Natalia Weichsel explores how harmful beauty standards can be, especially when they intersect with acne.
What you're seeing right now is my morning routine. So it starts off with skincare and then makeup and finally out the door. Seems pretty straightforward, right? Well, truth is it wasn't always that simple because most days I used to spend way too long in front of the mirror, hyperfixating about what my skin looks like. I used to have really bad acne. Now, we're not just talking about a few pimples here and there. I mean, I was taking oral antibiotics, I was using all kinds of topical treatments, I would avoid social events because I was so insecure about my skin. And most days, I couldn't even leave the house without a full face of makeup. It really began to affect me emotionally. So I wanted to challenge the conversations we're having about acne. And specifically, I wanted to see if there's some sort of relationship we can draw between acne and mental health. I'll be doing a deep dive into the different kinds of acne experiences other people have, and at the end of this, hopefully I'll have some sort of answer as to where these expectations for perfect skin come from in the first place. Recently, I noticed that more people are open to talking about their acne experience. One person that comes to mind is my friend Amrit. Now, we used to be on the same track team nearly 10 years ago, but when she moved away for school, we still kept in touch via social media. And recently, I noticed that she was posting a lot about her acne online. And this was really unique to see, especially because Amrit is a model. She lives in Toronto and she works on all sorts of projects, from fashion to runway editorials, as well as photo shoots and different kinds of modeling campaigns. So to see her post so candidly about her skincare imperfections, something that could potentially be so closely tied to her modeling career, was really unique to see. I reached out to learn a bit more. So Amrit, we're here today to talk about something very important to the both of us, something that the two of us have lived experience with. We are going to be talking about acne.
Ooh, our favorite.
Why don't you go ahead and tell me a little bit about your experience with this?
Grade 9 I was about 15 years old. That's when I was first introduced to acne. And I'm about to turn 23 and I still deal with it. Definitely in high school, it affected my confidence. Just the way I saw myself was distorted. Going to a high school where it was predominantly white and being a person of color, and I wasn't really proud of my ethnicity and I wanted to be white very badly to fit in. I felt like acne was one more thing that made me stand out from the crowd. Besides from like my bushy eyebrows, my thick hair, my skin color, this is just one more thing on top of that that made me different from my peers, which I hated.
So would you say there was a direct link between acne and mental health for you throughout your life?
For me, there definitely was, yeah, because the more I stressed out, the more I hyper-focused on like every little thing on my face. My acne was getting worse, my stress was getting worse. It was just, everything was all kind of falling apart and I didn't know how to get a grip and handle of everything, which ultimately deteriorated my mental health.
It's okay. It's okay. It's okay. It's okay. It's okay.
To learn more about where these beauty standards come from, I went to the University of Ottawa and met with Dr. Maithili Rajiva. She's an associate professor at the Institute of Feminist and Gender Studies, and she helped me better understand how acne intersects with other identities surrounding how we perceive beauty.
And I think skin is one of the ways in which, it's the thing that covers us, it's the thing that people see. And for girls and women especially, it becomes very much a way to determine whether or not you fit current beauty standards. Society has had for a long time an understanding of what hegemonic or dominant beauty is, and that is, always mainly white, often blonde, thin, heteronormative, cis, and able-bodied. So for racialized girls and women, just being of color means they are already quite much further away from what dominant understandings of beauty are.
How might that affect mental health, for example?
Being racialized has huge impacts on mental health and sort of what researchers would call everyday or insidious trauma. If you add to that the ways in which girls and young women have to constantly navigate this world through their bodies and their faces and be defined first and foremost within that notion of what is normatively attractive, you're talking about an intersection of very potentially dangerous mental health struggles that society doesn't take responsibility for, and it becomes very much internalized by individuals.
This conversation with Dr. Rajiva really helped me understand just how interconnected someone's identities can be. And it also forced me to confront my own awkward journey with acne, something that at the time seemed so personal, when in reality could actually be quite a universal experience. When I was experiencing acne, I was doing research online and I was talking to my parents, my mom. I was trying to find the source of what was happening. Did you have a similar experience?
Yeah, girl, YouTube was my best friend. YouTube, Google, I was on that like no other. So my Google searches primarily consisted of how to clear my acne in a week, how to clear my acne like in a day, overnight, what product should I be using, what food should I be eating that help. And I couldn't visibly see anyone who was experiencing really bad acne as I was. I guess I was trying to find a sense of community online.
What's really interesting about you, Amrit, is that you have sort of your own online community. Would you define it as that? How have you been talking about acne online? I think this is really interesting.
I made a promise to myself that I wouldn't edit my skin images when I posted onto social media. So I saw how detrimental it was to my mental health.
So I have your Instagram here, I've pulled it up. Is there like a picture you'd want me to focus in on in particular? You talked about mental health and acne. Which one should I go to?
I feel like this one, like the one with like my skin, yeah, that was almost like therapeutic for myself. Scary to post it online, but I needed to be honest with myself, and I guess I just like doing that in front of the public.
Good morning! I am currently taking the course to better understand acne because mine has returned and it's been a process.
Those teen years when I would search up acne or acne in the South Asian community or growing up as a brown girl in a Western society, I would find nothing. And that really impacted me because I felt like I was alone.
I think for young women of color to see more and more women of color represented in the modeling industry, in mainstream media, in Hollywood, on television, is incredibly important. It's not that representation is the only thing that matters, but it does matter, because how are you going to feel as if you belong to a particular culture if you never see yourself anywhere? If everywhere you turn, you see people who don't look like you.
Perhaps me having acne is my superpower. Maybe I'll be the first one on CoverGirl with like acne pigmentation on my face, and like that would be like, you know, like maybe that is what makes me special. Maybe that is why I still struggle with it to this day.
I'm really glad that people are able to look towards Amrit as she raises awareness about her acne struggles. I know I would have really loved seeing that when I was younger. But what I'm also seeing here is that destigmatizing acne isn't the only boundary that's being pushed. With Amrit, for example, she's also giving a voice to the South Asian experience of growing up in a Western society, while also pursuing a modeling career. And as Dr. Rajiva explained, these are examples of intersecting identities that can influence how we experience the world. And especially when we take into consideration just how harmful Western beauty standards can be, we can truly begin to understand how that might affect our mental health. So as I try to understand acne as a whole, I'll always remember that nothing is truly one-dimensional, not even the zits and pimples that we can get on our face. And now as I look at things on the surface, I'll always know that perhaps there's more to it than meets the eye, and that the skin that I'm in is beautiful just the way it is.
Our next journalist is on a journey to challenge herself. During the pandemic, Michaela Morgan saw her roommates fall down the running rabbit hole. One ran 2 marathons. The other has run 5 kilometers every day for nearly 1,000 days. To push her own boundaries, Michaela decided to start running herself.
Over the COVID-19 pandemic, I saw my roommates run a lot.
I saw their physical and mental health get way better. It got me thinking, why not run myself?
But taking to the track is hard, so I decided I needed some inspiration.
I spoke with Mike Caldwell, an Ironman triathlete who hosts ultramarathons from his home in Quebec, to become inspired. This is the Arc. That's what Mike Caldwell calls his home, and where he hosts the marathons.
Well, an ultramarathon is generally an off-road trail running race.
Right.
And I don't know, I think it depends on the course for the definition, but anything like 20 miles or longer can be considered an ultramarathon.
Mm-hmm.
So we have a 50-kilometer race here we call Relentless, and that happens in October.
50 kilometers sounded like a long run, so I asked Mike what kept him going year after year.
Say the community spirit for endurance is so powerful. I remember when I did it, I was like, oh man, I'm done. I can't go again. They're like, you got 3 minutes to rest. You said you weren't going to quit, because I didn't want to quit. Mm-hmm. And had this group not been here, I would have quit, right? Mm-hmm. But they're like, no, you can do one more. You can do one more. So finishers of my Relentless race, again, that happens in the fall. And we have a 3K race, 5K, 10K, 21K, and 50K. But the 10K, 21K, and 50K get these woodles, like it's a wooden medal. I cut down a tree on the property here. I have a laser burner, and everybody gets this award with the Mad Trapper Relentless 2022.
After speaking to Mike, I felt like I could run a marathon.
But I knew I needed to speak to one more person to make sure I don't hurt myself. Marjolaine Grunewald is a physiotherapist at the Glebe Physiotherapy Clinic in Ottawa.
You don't need a coach, you don't need much equipment, you don't need a gym, you don't need a membership, so it's easy to start, and most people who start really love it.
But as much as I love it, Marjolaine said that running can do short-term damages to my muscles and joints if I don't do it properly. If I wear the wrong shoes, I can feel pain in my knees. Runners can also feel pain in their shins, ankles, and even their lower backs.
But there was hope. Marjolaine said stretching my hamstrings and quads can go a long way.
That's it. When you're finished your run, either while you're still warm or later on that evening or on a separate day, we generally recommend you should do some stretches to feel that comfortable end there. Feel it? Yeah, and hold it. Yep, perfect. And foot to face, hold 3 to 5 seconds, whatever feels comfortable, and then you can do it a few times if you want.
Marie-Elaine also said strengthening exercises, like calf raises, would help prevent knee pain.
Now that I know how to avoid injury, I feel inspired again. I think it's time for me to hit the ground running.
Sports and fitness can be liberating, but they can also bring anxiety. It's especially true for people in trans and non-binary communities. Sarah Molina explores how physical wellness can be inclusive so that people of all genders can feel comfortable exercising.
Exercise is an important part of a healthy lifestyle. I try to go to the gym on campus at least 3 times a week because not only does it keep me active, but it also helps my mental health. I started going to the gym during my first year at Carleton. I was an Irish dancer growing up, so when I moved away for university, I was looking for a new way to stay active. Now, going to the gym as a beginner is daunting enough, but for women, it can be scary for other reasons. Sexual harassment is far too common an experience that women have at gyms, and survey data from 2019, conducted by equipment review site FitRated, found that 71% of women get harassed at the gym on a daily basis. So that got me thinking more about gender and fitness. Fitness has traditionally been so gendered in a binary way. You have change rooms, activewear, sports teams, uniforms, all of that is separated as men and women. It doesn't leave much room for the inclusion of trans, non-binary, and gender diverse people. A big topic right now is the inclusion of trans athletes on gendered sports teams. In the news, there have been multiple articles and researchers who have found that there is a pervasive anti-trans sentiment in sports and fitness. Transphobia has implications on the health and wellness of trans and non-binary folks. Due to barriers, they experience lower levels of physical activity compared to cisgender people, according to a study conducted by Loughborough University in England. So I've decided to speak to Alex Vincent, who's personally had to face these barriers. Alex is the co-founder of Ottawa Pride Hockey, a hockey team for 2S LGBTQ+ players.
I started skating when I was about 3. And then I still really like watching hockey on TV, and so I asked my parents if I could start playing hockey, and here we are.
Did your relationship with the game change at all after you transitioned?
Yeah, after I came out and started my transition, I stopped playing for about 5 years before getting back into it just a few years ago, maybe about 4 years ago.
So what barriers have been most prominent in your personal experience with hockey, but also just sports and fitness in general?
Being trans or non-binary, a lot of sports involve like changing in change rooms, and you know, when you're going through physical transition or even after, like a lot of people are not comfortable with their bodies and getting changed in front of other people, and so that is sort of a huge barrier that exists.
So how can we make these spaces more inclusive? How can we make sports and fitness more accessible and comfortable for trans and non-binary people? Keegan Prempe works in the Office of Equity and Inclusive Communities at Carleton University as the Trans and Non-Binary Inclusion Coordinator. I spoke to them to try to answer these questions. What can fitness organizations do to sort of bridge that accessibility gap?
Emphasizing co-ed as much as possible, or like giving people the option, and you know, making sure that people who are accessing that services or you know that organization understand that trans people have a right to participate in recreation and like just the way that they do. Yeah, trans people at Carleton have been doing a lot of organizing over the years. There's like the addition of like trans-specific kind of workout hours, offering that kind of space for like trans people and their allies who are interested in fitness and recreation, kind of like a designated place where in theory, you know, the people who are in that space have an awareness of like kind of barriers that trans people face when trying to access recreation. So hopefully, are more respectful.
The presence of safer, inclusive spaces is so important because they contribute to building a sense of community, which encourages participation. Alex spoke to me about how Ottawa Pride Hockey started.
Oh, Brett's on the ice now. Okay.
My friend Kat and I, we realized that there wasn't really a space for us to play and feel included here in Ottawa, so that's what sort of sparked us to start this. I think a lot of folks are uncomfortable in sports spaces in general who are part of the LGBTQ+ community. And so for us, providing a space where people feel comfortable was really important. And especially with hockey, with the change rooms, and the fact that hockey is often a very gendered sport, like there's like the men's league and women's league, but not a whole lot in between. So to allow a space for folks of all genders to be able to play, and then also realizing that some people may never have taken up playing hockey because of the barriers that are there, and just being able to share that experience with other people who have similar lived experiences as us, it just makes it so much more enjoyable.
Alex and Keegan have shown that some progress has been made in breaking down these barriers that keep trans and non-binary people out of sport. The Canadian Centre for Ethics in Sport outlined inclusion guidelines for organizations. These include non-discrimination policies, inclusive codes of conduct for athletes and staff, access to all gender change rooms, as well as letting athletes participate in their sport consistent with their gender identity, regardless of their transition status. But there's still a lot of work to be done. Everyone can make a difference in establishing more inclusive spaces for trans and non-binary people. It starts with respect and treating others the way you want to be treated. It's called the Golden Rule for a reason, and it applies to recreation just as much as anywhere else.
And that brings us to the end of this episode.
We've seen today how so many things around us are changing, and that people out there are challenging norms and breaking barriers.
Thank you for joining us for this edition of the 25th Hour. I am Kajal Dhaneshwari.
And I'm Emma Perreault. Take care and have a good one.